Well, he came with a message of hope, but to many Palestinians, it may be his side comments and his jokes that George Bush will be remembered for. What we saw in Ramallah today at the joint press conference between the Palestinian and US president may well go down as the diplomatic equivalent of shooting yourself in the foot. Well, George Bush, of course, on his first trip to the Palestinian territories as a US president, said he believed an agreement could be reached between Israelis and Palestinians this year. Mahmoud Abbas also upbeat, reiterating his commitment to the roadmap for peace. Well, Palestinian officials say the fact that you had a US president on Palestinian Authority territory talking about a Palestinian state, well, they say that in itself is an achievement. But you could just feel the moment melt when George Bush was asked about the hardships that Israeli checkpoints cause Palestinians. And he responded by joking about how he didn't have to stop at any. Rob Reynolds now with more on the man, the mission, and his message.
Following a one-on-one meeting with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas in Ramallah, an upbeat U.S. President George Bush said he is confident progress is being made toward peace.
I believe it's possible, not only possible, I believe it's going to happen, that there will be a signed peace treaty by the time I leave office.
But Bush's press conference comments hit on two issues that are like raw nerves to Palestinians: UN resolutions ignored by Israel and the web of Israeli checkpoints that restrict Palestinian movements in their own territory. When asked why Israel should not comply with UN resolutions calling upon it to withdraw from territories captured in the 1967 war, Bush was dismissive.
Look, the UN deal didn't work in the past. And so now we're going to have an opportunity to redefine the future by having a state negotiated between an elected leader of the Palestinian people as well as the Prime Minister of Israel.
For decades, the United States has not used its influence on successive Israeli governments to compel them to honor the UN resolutions. Palestinians see a gross disparity between that record and Bush's justification of the invasion of Iraq as enforcement of UN orders. Foggy weather early Thursday forced Bush to forego his usual helicopter mode of transportation. He went to Ramallah in a motorcade instead. A reporter asked if he had seen the Israeli military checkpoints along the way and whether he now had a better appreciation of the hardship they caused Palestinian civilians. Bush said he understood.
I can understand why the Palestinians are frustrated driving through checkpoints.
But his next remarks showed less understanding of how bitterly Palestinians resent those barriers which strangle the local economy and often subject Palestinians to petty humiliations.
You'll be happy to hear that my motorcade of a mere 45 cars was able to make it through without being stopped. But I'm not so exactly sure that's what happens to the average person.
Abbas kept a smile on his face for Bush's joke, but it was a quip most of his countrymen would not find amusing. Rob Reynolds, Al Jazeera, Jerusalem.
Well, night is now falling here in East Jerusalem. You may be able to see behind me the Dome of the Rock Mosque, and further in that compound there is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. This area, this is part of the thorny issues that George Bush has come to try and nudge the Palestinians and Israelis into sorting out. Well, George Bush, as we mentioned, was at that press conference today with the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. David Chater, our correspondent, was also there monitoring what was going on. We can cross to him live now. David, I don't mean to make you a spokesperson for the US President, but many people must be asking, what was George Bush thinking when he made that joke about checkpoints?
It was extraordinary. It's not just extraordinary for the fact it was said in Ramallah and it was said to the Palestinians. It's extraordinary to anybody who knows the Middle East, anybody who's travelled in the occupied West Bank. You know and I know the pain and the humiliation that's caused at these checkpoints. I remember once in HAWARA, one of the main checkpoints outside Nablus, and I was doing the story of a family who lost their main loved one when he was told to walk. He was a cancer patient. He was told to get out of his car and walk across the checkpoint, and that killed him. So that's the sort of experience that most Palestinians have of these humiliating checkpoints and security barriers throughout the occupied West Bank. So it was very much in bad taste. It's a joke that would not have gone down well with anybody in Gaza or in the occupied West Bank, frankly.
Well, David, Al Jazeera has been out to take a look at those checkpoints, and Ayman Moyheldin went out to check out the checkpoints. Let's look at what he had to find.
It may have been an off-the-cuff remark, but President Bush's comment about passing through an Israeli checkpoint without being searched or stopped is actually a far cry from the reality that most Palestinians have to experience on a daily basis. I am standing at one of the most notorious checkpoints in the West Bank. It separates two Palestinian cities from each other. On one side, you have the village of HAWARA. On the other side, you have the Palestinian city of Nablus. Every day, hundreds, if not thousands, of Palestinians line up early morning, all just to get a chance to cross this checkpoint in hopes of being able to get jobs, being able to see family relatives, being able to get medical care. What you're seeing right now is one part of the process, and this is for vehicles going in and out of these two Palestinian cities. They're being searched by Israeli soldiers, and all of their cars, they have to disembark their cars, all of their vehicles are searched.
These medics told me every day we pass through this checkpoint, we don't know how long it will be. It all depends on the mood of the soldiers. Some days they delay us just to check the IDs of our sick patients. We have lost people at this checkpoint. The father of this patient told me it's taken a half day just to get his son to the hospital. And he also has some advice to visiting President George Bush. Don't intervene in our lives.
Those that are returning from the city of Nablus are actually asked to get out of the car, walk through this terminal on the right side, where they're sometimes strip searched, all of their belongings are searched, their IDs have to be verified. It's a process that on a good day could last for an individual anywhere between an hour to 2 hours. On a bad day could last a good part of the day. As you can see, the activity lasts well into the evening hours. We can see right now that hundreds of these Palestinians that have been in line have actually gone through. Now they are able to get in these taxis to drive them to the next Palestinian city and could once again experience that very same process all over again. There are hundreds of these types of roadblocks in between Palestinian cities and that separate one from each other. There are also roadblocks and what are sometimes called flash checkpoints, checkpoints that are set up randomly at any given one of these roads where Palestinians have to go through this process all over again. So you could certainly see that the reality for ordinary Palestinians is a far cry away from what President Bush was talking about when he drove today through the VIP checkpoint. In fact, most of the Palestinians here, most of the Palestinians in the West Bank will spend their entire lives not being able to have the privilege of driving through a VIP checkpoint.
Ayman Moyheldin there with the reality of Israeli checkpoints, of course a very sensitive issue in the West Bank. David, Palestinian officials have been talking to us and they say, well, just the fact that you have a US president in Ramallah talking about a Palestinian state, that's an achievement. Is that the best thing that can be said for this visit so far?
Yes and no, of course. It's always quite complicated here. Yes, it does appear to be merely a photo opportunity for the President Bush. The Palestinians were very much hoping that he would come and put pressure on the Israelis to make some of those painful concessions, especially a freeze on settlements and any the dismantling of the outposts. But there doesn't seem to be much progress on that front. But nevertheless, as Saeb Erekat was saying, it is important that the American president is standing there talking about a two-state solution, talking about the fact that Palestine will be a state in the future if these two sides can get down to proper final status negotiations. So yes, it's an important notch, if you like, but I mean then he took it away by talking about the fact that his vision of a two-state solution is going to replace all the United Nations resolutions. That is an extraordinary thing. He's throwing away there in one phrase the complete history on which the Palestinians measure all the humiliations piled on them by the Israelis, and the fact that the right of return itself is guaranteed in those United Nations resolutions. You just can't chuck those resolutions away because you're chucking away so much painful history of the Palestinians.